Let me share the time my entire world crumbled, one deception at a time. From an outsider's perspective, Mia and I seemed to lead an idyllic life. We had a charming little house just outside London, steady jobs, a tight-knit group of friends, the whole package. I always took pride in what we had built together, genuinely believing we had everything figured out. I held down a stable office job that not only paid the bills but allowed for a few luxuries, while Mia, she was the social butterfly, flitting from one activity to another, leaving me feeling like the boring, responsible husband keeping everything in order. However, everything began to unravel, and in hindsight, maybe I was just too stubborn to recognize the signs for what they truly were. It started off innocuously. You know how they say that the devil is in the details? They're absolutely right. Initially, it was the little things. She would spend excessive time on her phone, even during dinner. I'd watch her thumb racing across the screen, her eyes glued to that small display as if it contained the universe's deepest secrets. When I'd inquire, "Who are you texting?" she would laugh it off or respond with, "Oh, just Sophie," her friend who always seemed to be in some sort of crisis. Yet, the way she would delete messages almost immediately gnawed at me, as if she couldn't wait to erase them. I'm not naive. I know when something feels off. Then came the litany of excuses. The sudden workouts and personal training sessions at odd hours. I'm talking 8 p.m. on a Friday night. Really? Mia had never cared about the gym before, but now it was as if she was preparing for a marathon. And how could I forget the girls' nights out? One evening she told me she was out for cocktails with Sophie and a few other friends, but whenever I asked about it later, it was always the same vague response. "Oh, it was just the usual. Nothing special." And Sophie? Don't get me started on her. This so-called best friend never seemed to be available when I tried to reach her or arrange a double date. Convenient, isn't it? The pieces began to click into place, but they were the pieces I wished I could ignore. One night, I caught her on the phone, whispering as if she were hiding something. There was a softness to her voice, an intimacy that sounded almost like she was speaking to a lover. When I walked into the room, she nearly dropped her phone, hastily saying, "I'll call you back later," and hung up, looking like a child caught stealing cookies. "Who was that?" I probed. She rolled her eyes and replied, "Just Sophie again. God, you're always so paranoid." Paranoid. That was the term she consistently threw at me, making me feel like I was the one unraveling. I attempted to rationalize it. I told myself that we were simply facing a rough patch, that maybe my suspicions were unfounded. But those moments kept accumulating, and they became increasingly difficult to ignore. Our friends Ethan and Grace picked up on it too. I could see the concern in their eyes whenever Mia would slip out of a party or social gathering early. She'd always fabricate some excuse. "I'm tired," "I have a headache," or, my personal favorite, "I have an early start tomorrow." Ethan and Grace, bless them, would throw me these looks as if silently asking, "Is everything all right?" I would nod, plaster on a smile, and say, "Yeah, she's just tired." What else was I supposed to say? Yet a sense of unease gnawed at me, a restless anxiety that robbed me of sleep at night. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every odd behavior of Mia's over and over. The night she returned home wearing a perfume she'd never used before, those moments when she appeared almost giddy, as if she held a secret she was eager to keep. And when I attempted to connect with her, like planning a date night, cooking dinner, trying to reignite that spark, she'd dismiss me. One night, I set the mood with candles, prepared her favorite pasta, and played the album that accompanied our first date. All I received in return was an eye roll and a fleeting peck on the cheek. "Not tonight, James. I'm really not in the mood," she'd say, as if acknowledging me was a tedious chore. Eventually, I realized I had to confide in someone or I'd lose my mind. So, I called up Jake, my best mate since our high school days. We met at our usual haunt, a quiet pub a few blocks away, and I spilled everything to him. The texts, the late-night escapades, the so-called workouts. I anticipated him to panic, affirming my worries, insisting that she was undoubtedly cheating. But instead, he just nodded and said, "Mate, maybe she's just going through something. You know how relationships can be. A rough patch doesn't mean the end." I could tell he was trying to be supportive, playing the peacemaker role, but it didn't alleviate the growing knot in my stomach. After that conversation, I knew I needed to uncover the truth behind whatever the hell was happening. Sure, maybe I was overreacting. Perhaps she was genuinely focused on self-improvement and hanging out with friends. But the notion of Mia hiding something from me wouldn't let go. So I decided to become more observant, to piece everything together. Each time she went out, I'd keep track of the time. When she returned late, I'd discreetly sniff her clothes for traces of perfume, alcohol, or whatever else she might have brought back. Whenever she left her phone unattended for even a moment, I'd stare at it, my fingers itching to unlock it and uncover her secrets. Thus began my descent into suspicion, doubt, and ultimately, betrayal. This was merely the beginning, and believe me, things only spiraled darker from here. I couldn't continue living in this state of suspicion and denial. I had to uncover the truth, and it was clear Mia wasn't going to reveal it to me. I was constantly on edge. Every little action of hers felt like an accusation hanging in the air. But I lacked any tangible proof. Nothing I could confront her with that wouldn't be deflected by her ironclad excuses. I knew I had to get clever and think outside the box. One evening, as Mia prepared for yet another of her gym sessions, I finally stumbled upon a breakthrough. She left her laptop open on the kitchen table while she hopped into the shower. It felt like a now or never opportunity. My hands trembled slightly as I sat down and lifted the lid, but the urge to know far outweighed my guilt. I wasn't snooping. I was on a quest for the truth. At least, that's how I justified it to myself. I began to sift through her emails and messages, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I glanced at her calendar. What I found were a series of bizarre entries, cryptic abbreviations and symbols that looked completely nonsensical. I saw things like T and C, BD, and an occasional heart or star emoji. None of them were labeled as work meetings or typical social plans. When I clicked on one, it simply stated, busy. Busy with what? These entries aligned perfectly with the nights she'd mysteriously disappear. It was like I had discovered a secret code, something you'd see in a spy film. It wasn't like Mia to utilize her laptop for anything other than work-related tasks, so I realized this must be where she stashed her secrets. I tried Googling the terms, but I hit nothing but dead ends. That's when it hit me. These weren't your run-of-the-mill plans. They were codes for something much more sinister, something she didn't want me or anyone else to decipher. But how was I supposed to figure it out? Over the next few nights, I took on the role of a detective, attempting to unravel her movements, her appointments, and the peculiar patterns in her behavior. Yet, all this sleuthing led to more confusion and a growing sense of rage. It felt like assembling a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit. So, when she announced one Friday night that she was going out for drinks with the girls, I reached my breaking point. I was tired of the games. I made the decision to follow her. No frills, just plain following. I knew it was desperate, but at that point it was all I had left. That night, she got all dressed up. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup impeccable, and she wore a black dress that clung to her body like it was painted on. I watched her fix herself up in the mirror, adjusting her dress to reveal just enough skin. "Are you really just meeting Sophie?" I asked, striving to sound nonchalant, though my voice cracked under the pressure. She caught my gaze in the mirror and smirked. "Of course. Who else would I be meeting?" She grabbed her purse, tossed me a quick kiss, and was out the door before I could even respond. I waited a good 15 minutes before snatching my car keys. I didn't have a clear destination in mind, but something told me I should follow her. I kept a safe distance behind her, trailing her little black hatchback through the narrow streets of London until we entered an unfamiliar area, an upscale neighborhood dotted with opulent mansions. Not exactly the kind of place you'd visit for a casual drink with friends. She parked in front of a colossal house, more like a lavish palace. Cars lined the street and elegantly dressed people were pouring in, like they were headed to some exclusive gala or club. I parked a bit further down the road, close enough to see but far enough not to draw attention. I could hardly wrap my mind around what I was witnessing. Mia emerged from her car, seamlessly blending into the crowd heading toward the mansion. She wasn't just going out for a drink. This was something far more extravagant. The men sported sharp suits, while the women, let's just say they weren't leaving much to the imagination. Mia walked with an air of confidence, as if she belonged there, as if she had been part of this scene countless times before. My heart raced, lodged somewhere in my throat as I sat frozen in my car. What on earth was happening? My wife was stepping into a lavish mansion party dressed in a way that left me utterly speechless, but I needed to know more. Gathering my courage, I climbed out of the car, nerves tangled in a knot, and approached the house. I couldn't just stroll in. Heavens, I wasn't dressed for it. But then fortune smiled upon me. I noticed a delivery truck pulling into the driveway. Thinking on my feet, I grabbed an empty cardboard box from the back of the truck and made my way toward the front door, trying to exude an air of confidence. "Delivery for inside," I muttered to the bouncer stationed at the entrance. He barely glanced my way, merely grunted and waved me through. It was astonishingly easy. Once I stepped past the threshold, it felt as if I had entered an entirely different universe. The air was thick with perfume and cologne. The lighting dimmed and the music thumped loudly. People were dancing, drinking, and flirting. But this wasn't just your everyday flirting. It had a charged energy, a tantalizing intimacy. And right there in the center of it all was Mia. She appeared to be a completely different woman, seductive, untamed, radiating a confidence I had never witnessed. A drink was in one hand while she was deep in conversation with a tall, dashing man in a suit, laughing at whatever he said. And she wasn't holding back. She was touching his arm, leaning in closely, whispering into his ear. My stomach twisted violently, and my head felt like it was about to implode. I knew I needed proof, so I fished my phone out and began recording. Quick, shaky shots of Mia with this guy, her dancing with strangers and her sipping champagne while flashing a smile that was definitely not meant for me. I felt like a voyeur, a peeping Tom, but I had to gather something concrete to confront her with, something she couldn't dismiss or brush off as paranoia. The further I moved through the house, the more surreal things became. There were private booths draped in heavy velvet curtains, and people would slip inside only to emerge looking disheveled, if you catch my drift. Mia remained near the main floor, but that didn't lessen the damning evidence. It was all laid bare before my eyes, the undeniable proof that my marriage was built on lies, that my wife had been living a double life. I lingered as long as I could stand it, then bolted from there. I was overwhelmed, unsure of what to think or how to act. It was all too much to process. The betrayal, the web of lies, the realization that Mia was willing to toss aside everything we had built together for, what? Cheap thrills? A few drinks and some scandalous dancing with strangers? When I finally got home that night, I collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the floor as I replayed the footage over and over. It felt as if the ground had been ripped out from beneath me, as if everything I knew was crumbling. How was I supposed to confront her? What could I possibly say? All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. Whatever unfolded next wasn't going to be pretty. The following day was like a waking nightmare. Sleep eluded me. How could I sleep? Every time I closed my eyes, Mia's image filled my mind, flirting, dancing, dressed like a stranger. When I finally managed to drift off, it was a restless, furious sleep, the kind that leaves you more exhausted upon waking than when you lay down. Each time I opened my eyes, I hoped it was all just a terrible dream, but the harsh reality slammed back into me like a freight train. I spent the entire morning glued to my phone, replaying the footage from the night before. I examined every detail obsessively, the way her laughter floated through the air, how her fingers grazed that guy's arm, and the carefree glimmer in her eyes. Each moment made my stomach churn, yet I couldn't pull myself away, like a moth drawn to a flame. There was no escaping the truth. This was far from harmless fun, as she liked to call it. It felt as though she was living out a fantasy I never knew existed, something raw and genuine in her interactions that left me feeling completely unmoored. By the time Mia strolled in that afternoon, I was a bundle of nerves, powered solely by caffeine and adrenaline. She walked through the door like she was the queen of the castle, as if the previous night had been nothing out of the ordinary. Tossing her purse on the floor and shedding her shoes, she flashed me that casual smile that used to make my heart race. Now, it ignited a furious fire within me. "Hey, babe," she greeted, making a beeline for the kitchen. "Want me to whip up some lunch?" I couldn't help but fixate on her, desperate to read her expression, searching for any trace of guilt or regret. But she was a master at this, far too skilled. I couldn't tell if she was feigning innocence or if she genuinely didn't care. I followed her into the kitchen, trying to keep my voice even. "So, how was your night? Did you enjoy yourself with Sophie and the girls?" For just a fraction of a second, her back stiffened, an imperceptible shift that I would have missed if I hadn't been so attuned to her movements. She turned to me, that same artificial smile plastered on her face. "Yeah, it was fun. We just had a few drinks, caught up, nothing too crazy." My fists clenched involuntarily. So she was going to lie right to my face, after everything I'd witnessed. "Really? Just a few drinks, huh?" She cocked her head, regarding me as if I were speaking a foreign language. "Yeah, what's with the interrogation, James?" "Just seems a bit interesting, that's all," I replied, struggling to keep my revulsion in check, "especially considering where you really were last night." Her eyes narrowed and she glanced down at her phone, fingers scrolling through messages as if she could find an escape route. "What are you talking about?" I could no longer hold back my frustration. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling, and hit play on the video. The audio wasn't pristine, but it didn't need to be. There she was, front and center, laughing and flirting, dancing with strangers at that opulent mansion. The color drained from her face the instant she recognized the scene, and her phone clattered onto the countertop as she dropped it. "James, what is this?" she stammered, her voice attempting to mask the panic creeping into her eyes. She looked like a cornered animal, frantically searching for a way out. "You tell me," I replied, my voice low but heavy with suppressed rage. "You claimed you were with Sophie, yet you ended up at some extravagant party, dressed to the nines, doing whatever it was you were doing. What the hell is really going on?" She snatched the phone from my grasp, desperately trying to stop the video, but I pulled it back. "James, please. It's not what it looks like. It was just an experiment, okay? Harmless flirting, that's all. I was trying something new. It doesn't mean anything." "Harmless flirting?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Yeah, because that certainly looked harmless. Hanging out in a mansion with strangers, touching that guy like you were ready to strip him bare. Harmless, right?" She took a step back, tears welling in her eyes, but I was done playing the sympathy card. She always resorted to this, turning on the waterworks to paint herself as the victim. I I don't know what to say. I'm sorry, okay? It was a mistake. A mistake? I yelled, my emotions spilling over. This wasn't some fluke, Mia. You orchestrated this. You've been sneaking around for who knows how long, and you lied to my face about it. What happened to us? Why would you betray everything we built? Mia wiped her tears away, her expression hardening. Maybe because our marriage is mundane, James. Maybe because you've become boring. I needed something thrilling, something that made me feel alive. Do you think I wanted it to come to this? Do you think I enjoy sneaking around? So, this is my fault? You're blaming me for your escapades? She threw her hands up in frustration. I didn't want to hurt you, but I needed more. Everything with us. It's so predictable. We wake up, go to work, come home, watch TV. It's like living the same day on repeat. I didn't choose this life, James. It just happened. Right. So your idea of excitement is getting half naked with strangers and lying to your husband about it? It was Sophie's idea, she shot back defensively. She took me to one of those parties to show me what it was like. She said it would help me relax, loosen up. I didn't expect it to escalate like this. Don't you dare put this on Sophie, I seethed, my voice trembling with fury. You made the choice to deceive. You made the choice to cheat. And now you're acting like this was all some unfortunate accident? God, James, can't you understand? This was never about hurting you. I felt trapped, like I was suffocating in this life we created, and I didn't know how to save myself. We stood there in the kitchen, locked in a staring match, the silence between us heavy and charged like a ticking time bomb. I was at a loss for words, struggling to make sense of it all. Everything felt surreal, as if I were observing my own life crumble from a distance. All those years we had spent together, the love we had shared, the trust we had built. It felt like a cruel, twisted joke. Do you even love me? I finally asked, my voice barely rising above a whisper. She hesitated, her gaze shifting away. I do, but I don't know if it's the same kind of love anymore. That felt like a punch to the gut. All those years, all those memories, and for what? So she could pursue some twisted idea of excitement at my expense. After Mia stormed out of the kitchen, I stood there, feeling as though the ground had crumbled beneath my feet. I grabbed my phone and called my sister, Ella. She had always been my rock, the one person who could make sense of the chaos. When I explained everything, she didn't gasp or judge or throw accusations. She simply listened, allowing me to pour out my heart, revealing every raw and painful detail. James, she said gently once I finished, you're in the middle of a storm right now, and I can't pretend to understand your pain. But you need to take a step back, breathe, and figure out what you truly want. Don't let Mia's nonsense make you forget who you are. You deserve better than this. She was right. I needed time to think, to gather my thoughts before making any rash decisions. But how could I figure out what I wanted when my entire life felt like it had been flipped upside down? As the shock wore off and heartbreak set in, something darker started to rise within me. Anger. A seething rage that clouded my thoughts, making it hard to think straight. Each time I closed my eyes, I pictured Mia at that party, her laughter echoing in my mind, dancing like I didn't even exist. It wasn't just that she cheated on me or broke my trust. She had to twist the narrative, play the victim, make it all my fault. And you know what? I couldn't let that happen, not anymore. A few nights later, the idea struck me like lightning. I was sitting alone in my living room, nursing a bottle of whiskey and staring at my phone, replaying that damned footage for what felt like the 100th time. Each viewing ignited a fire within me, making me feel increasingly powerless. That's when it hit me. While I couldn't stop her from doing what she did, I could certainly make her pay for it. She wasn't going to waltz away unscathed after turning my life upside down. So, I called Ethan. He was the go-to guy when you needed something done, always knowing his way around, especially online. If anyone could help me make Mia regret her choices, it was him. I told him we needed to meet urgently, and he agreed to come over that night. When he arrived, he took one look at my disheveled appearance, eyes wild, holding back tears, and knew something serious was brewing. "What the hell's going on, mate?" he asked, sinking into the couch and giving me that wary look as if preparing for a storm. I spilled everything, the lies, the party, the footage I had captured. I laid it all bare like a confessional, but with each word, the anger inside me simmered hotter. Ethan sat quietly for a moment, digesting the gravity of the situation. "James, mate, that's messed up. But what are you planning to do with all this?" I clenched my jaw, forcing the words out with intensity. "I want to expose her. I want everyone to see what she's been up to. I want to make sure she can't hide behind her lies anymore." He shook his head, clearly torn. "I get it. I really do. She deserves to face consequences for what she did. But putting that video out there? That's serious, man. Once it's online, there's no going back. It could ruin her." "That's the point," I replied, almost growling. "She destroyed our marriage, our lives. I refuse to let her walk away unscathed. I want her to feel the weight of what she's done. She deserves to be humiliated." Ethan leaned back, running a hand through his hair, clearly conflicted. "James, this is revenge, plain and simple. I understand you're hurting, but you need to think about what you're doing. This could get really messy. For you too." I knew he had a point, at least in some respects. But that part of me, the part that was wounded and betrayed, couldn't be reasoned with. I had spent too long being the nice guy, the understanding husband. Not anymore. "I've already made my decision, Ethan. You said you'd help me if I needed it. Well, I need you now. Are you in or out?" He let out a long sigh and nodded, though I could see the hesitation in his eyes. "All right, man, I'm in. But just remember, you asked for this." Over the next few days, Ethan and I got to work. We camped out at my kitchen table for hours, meticulously combing through every second of footage I had recorded. We highlighted the most damning clips of Mia, her dancing with those guys, leaning in to whisper, the suggestive looks exchanged. We edited the video into short, jarring segments, moments that left nothing to the imagination. Then we added captions that painted the whole sordid tale, revealing the true character of Mia when she thought no one was watching. It was brutal, and even as I watched the finished product, I felt a mix of satisfaction and shame. It was like staring at a train wreck, devastating and impossible to turn away from. But it was done, and there was no turning back. Ethan set up anonymous social media accounts, ensuring it couldn't be traced back to either of us, and then we hit upload. The video went live across multiple platforms: Reddit, Facebook, even a couple of those closed forums where gossip and scandal spread like wildfire. And then we waited. It didn't take long. Within hours, the video was being shared, commented on, and dissected. People I didn't even know were chiming in, some in disbelief, others recounting their own stories of betrayal. And the views, good Lord, the views started climbing, first by the thousands, then tens of thousands, and soon it soared into the hundreds of thousands. Mia's face, her actions, all of it was laid bare for the world to see, and the internet did what it does best: judge, mock, and spread the word like wildfire. I felt vindicated in a twisted sort of way, watching people tear her down, call her out for what she did. For a brief moment, I thought I had finally gotten a taste of justice, but with that sense of vindication came a nagging doubt. Had I crossed a line? I tried to push those thoughts away, drowning them in whiskey and adrenaline. This was no longer about being the good guy. This was about revenge. The fallout for Mia came swiftly. Her phone rang incessantly. Calls, texts, voicemails from friends, family, and even strangers. I sat back and watched her on the couch, her face buried in her hands, tears streaming down as her notifications lit up like a Christmas tree. She desperately tried to delete the video, tried reporting it, but it was far too late. The internet had sunk its teeth into her and there was no letting go. To make matters worse, her job caught wind of the scandal. She worked in a conservative office, and let's just say they weren't too thrilled to have one of their employees thrust into the spotlight of a public scandal. One night she exploded, her voice laced with desperation. "What did you do, James? Why would you do this to me?" But I stayed silent. What could I possibly say? I just watched her unravel, like a tower of lies finally collapsing under its weight. This chaos began to seep into my own life too. One of my coworkers, David, pulled me aside one day at the office, giving me a look that told me he knew everything. "James, listen," he said quietly. "I heard about what's going on. I'm sorry you're dealing with this, mate, but you've got to be careful. Doing something like this, putting it out there, it's not just about her anymore. It could backfire. Legally, professionally, personally." I tried to brush him off, pretending I was fine. But deep down, his words gnawed at me. Was I becoming the villain in my own story? I didn't know anymore. All I wanted was for Mia to feel the weight of her actions, to be stripped of her facade, to realize there were consequences. But what if David was right? What if I had crossed a line? Days turned into weeks, and the chaos only intensified. Mia transformed into a mere shadow of her former self, haunted and desperate, grasping for any sense of control over her life. And me? I watched it all unfold, caught between a sick sense of satisfaction and the creeping dread that maybe, just maybe, this revenge had cost me more than I anticipated. It didn't take long for the fallout to reach its inevitable conclusion: divorce. Mia was furious, and honestly, she had every right to be. The video exposed more than just her infidelity. It unveiled everything she'd been trying to hide, and it destroyed her. But I won't pretend it was all black and white. In many ways, we had ruined each other. When she finally served me with divorce papers, accusing me of emotional abuse and ruining her reputation, I knew we were beyond saving. We were headed for war. The arguments that ensued were among the ugliest moments of my life. All that pent-up anger and resentment that had been festering for years spilled out like poison. There were no boundaries left, no civility to hold us back. We fought over everything: our home, the money in our accounts, even Buddy, our Labrador, who had been with us since our second anniversary. Mia fought dirty, and I matched her blow for blow. I didn't care. If she wanted a battle, she was going to get one. Mia's family got involved too. Her brother, Ryan, confronted me one night as I was leaving a bar. He grabbed me by the collar and shoved me against a brick wall, his face contorted with rage. "You think this is a game, you bastard?" he spat. "You think you can just destroy her life and walk away? If you ever cared about her, about us, you'll take down that video. You'll end this." I shook him off, but the guilt hit me like a punch to the gut. She did this to herself, Mike. All of it. I'm just showing the world the truth. But even as those words left my lips, I could feel how hollow they sounded. Truth and revenge had become so intertwined in my mind that I wasn't sure where one ended and the other began. In the midst of all this chaos, I met Hannah, my divorce lawyer. The first time I stepped into her office, I was a wreck. I was unshaven, disheveled, a man whose life was unraveling. I remember stumbling over my words as I recounted everything, from the betrayal to the video to the brutal divorce that loomed ahead. Hannah listened with calm professionalism, but there was something in her eyes, a compassion I hadn't encountered in what felt like ages. "Look, James," she said after I finished my tale, "you're in a tough spot. I won't sugarcoat it. This is going to get messy, but I'm here to help you come out of this as whole as possible." She was right about the messiness. The divorce process was nothing short of a war zone. Each meeting with Mia and her lawyer felt like I was stepping onto a battlefield, filled with tension and animosity. We'd sit across from each other in cramped conference rooms, lobbing accusations like grenades. Mia hurled blame at me for ruining her life, claiming that my actions had cost her everything: her job, her friendships, her self-respect. I'd spout all the things you're supposed to say in these situations, that she brought this upon herself, that she was the one who cheated, deceived, and betrayed me. But deep down, I was painfully aware that I wasn't exactly the hero of this tale. I knew my own faults, and I recognized that any victories I claimed in this divorce would come at a price. As the proceedings dragged on, more painful revelations emerged. Mia's double life was far more complex than I had ever realized. It wasn't merely a desperate search for excitement or a one-off party. She had been involved with other men for years, sometimes sneaking off to secret clubs, other times right under my nose while I thought she was attending yoga or brunch with Sophie. It was as if I had married a stranger, someone entirely different from the woman I thought I knew. The court proceedings felt interminable, draining both our emotional reserves and finances. Yet, amid all the turmoil, I started to feel a sense of reclaiming my identity. Each step I took toward separating from Mia felt like a step toward freedom. Hannah stood by my side through it all, fierce, determined, and always willing to lend an ear. We spent countless hours together, poring over legal documents, strategizing, and sometimes just chatting about life. She shared her own journey through divorce, detailing how she rebuilt her life afterward. There was a warmth to her, a genuine kindness that made those dark days feel a bit less suffocating. When the divorce was finally finalized, I didn't experience the triumphant joy I had envisioned. Instead, it felt more like relief. It was as if an unbearable weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Mia and I had decimated each other, but at least now it was over. The house was sold, our assets split, and I got to keep Buddy. In the end, he was the only thing we truly cherished together. I was free, but the aftermath left me feeling strangely empty. I wandered aimlessly around my new, smaller flat, unsure of what to do with myself. I had lost my wife, my previous life, and, in many respects, my very identity. For a while, I tried to numb the pain with alcohol and fleeting encounters, cheap distractions that only left me feeling more hollow. But Buddy was always there, his warm presence reminding me that I still had something worth clinging to. Gradually, I began to rebuild my life. I joined a gym, partly out of frustration and partly to regain a sense of control. I reconnected with old friends, the ones I had neglected during my marriage. I started spending time with Hannah outside the confines of her office, enjoying dinners, walks in the park, and rediscovering the joys of life I had forgotten. She was my lawyer, yes, but she also became my confidant and friend. Before long, she evolved into something even deeper. Our relationship didn't blossom overnight. It grew steadily, like a spark transforming into a steady flame. Hannah embodied everything Mia wasn't. She was stable, honest, and willing to see me for who I truly was, flaws and all. She never demanded perfection or expected me to have it all figured out. She simply listened, and that was all I needed. For the first time in ages, I felt like I was rediscovering the parts of myself I had lost during my time with Mia. I picked up new hobbies, things I had always wanted to try but never prioritized. Cooking, hiking, even dabbling in photography. With each new pursuit, each step forward, the anger and bitterness began to melt away. One night, after a few drinks and an in-depth conversation with Hannah about life and loss, I found myself at my computer, opening Reddit. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say or why I felt compelled to share, but I started typing. I poured out my story, the highs, the lows, the mistakes, and the lessons learned. I held nothing back. I wanted others to understand what it felt like to have your world torn apart, but also to recognize that it was possible to come out the other side, to find hope again, and rebuild. So here I am, sharing this with you as candidly as I can. My life isn't perfect. There are days when the past still shadows me, when I still feel the sting of betrayal. But I'm learning, each day, to let go a little more, to forgive myself for the choices I made out of hurt and anger, to release the illusion of who I thought Mia was and embrace the person I've become. If there's one truth I've gleaned from this journey, it's that life doesn't always unfold as planned. But sometimes the chaos leads you to places you never expected, places that might just be where you were meant to end up all along.